If you're a CrossFit athlete and you're looking for a hack to get strong, well, you're in the wrong place. The reality is the vast majority of people, even the people watching this, won't attack their strength deficit with the persistent, unwavering aggression that is needed to build elite strength. One of my favorite quotes is from Michael Ban, and he says, "You have to need it," referring to strength. Like, it's not enough just want to get strong. You have to have a really deep need to be strong in order to really build a lot of strength. That being said, there are always things that can help athletes move the needle. And as a coach, that's my primary job. It's my duty to find those things for athletes and to go about seeking out some of those less costly gains, let's call it, and to leverage them to the greatest degree we can, which is really the whole idea behind like low-hanging fruit, if you've heard of that. So one example of this type of like low-hanging fruit for a lot of athletes would be something along the lines of like BFR, blood flow restriction. So BFR cuffs, I think they're getting a little bit of popularity, but anyway, it's still something that a lot of people haven't had exposure to. And if they haven't had exposure to it, it's one of the things that if you give them that sort of a stimulus, it's going to be novel and they're probably going to adapt to it pretty well because it's not something that they've experienced before. And the other great thing about BFR in particular, while I'm on it, is that for a lot of athletes, they can do similar or less amounts of work and get the same adaptations out of it, which is obviously unique and favorable. And while yes, it's completely different in the concept of low-hanging fruit, I believe it applies the same way, is related to machines. Now, machines are something that a lot of CrossFit athletes, believe it or not, at this point, don't have a ton of experience on. Because for me growing up, it was like free weights and machines, and you'd do a bunch of each of those, and a lot of the weight rooms, and still today, the commercial gyms have those available. And there's distinct advantages to machines that a lot of CrossFit athletes at this point have either been a decade plus removed from, or they've grown up in the sport where they've never had access to those things. So again, the concept of low-hanging fruit comes back into play. The great thing about machines, the thing that I love about them, and when I have access to them, or the certain ones that my gym has, that I program regularly, is what's the greatest benefit in my mind is that it creates all the stability that allows someone to express their maximal output over a very specific constraints. So basically it's allowing you as the coach or the programmer to select exactly what you want to keep pressure on, so to speak. So you want to have a particular physiological weak point that you're going after. Machines allow you to target that in a very specific way and keep the pressure, so to speak, on that thing the entire time. You're selecting the physiological weak point that you're trying to address, and you're able to keep on that the entire time. This is probably most easily explained if I just use an example. So my third favorite machine is the Lat Pull Down. Our Lat Pull Down here at the gym is old, it's pretty janky. We got it from actually a high school that was redoing their weight room, and we threw it into an elevator and that didn't work, so we had to carry it down the stairs and throw it in the back of a truck. But we eventually got it here. While it's like plate loaded and doesn't have like all the bells and whistles that a lot of the newer ones have, it does exactly what we need it to do. We have a couple different attachments that we use, things like a tricep extension, just a regular old lat pull down, neutral grip. And again, that is plenty for our needs, and it allows us to, again, keep the pressure, so to speak, on the musculature that we want to be working. So what I see with a lot of CrossFit athletes is that and honestly, I think every CrossFit gym should have a lat pull down, for the reason that a lot of people are working on getting their strict pull-ups. And if they don't have them, doing kipping pull-ups is just a liability, frankly. And the great thing about a lat pull down is that, first of all, the strength curve is pretty even from the bottom to the top, meaning that if you're doing a band assisted pull-up, it helps you a lot at the bottom where you're typically strongest in the movement. It doesn't help you much at all at the top where the movement's typically the hardest. So you see people and it's really easy in the first couple inches of the range of motion, and then they can't even get their chin over top of the bar at the top because they're not getting enough assistance. Where a lat pull down is going to be equal the entire way. Not only that, but you really can't kip a lat pull down, right? So it encourages athletes to keep pressure on the lat the entire time, which for most people, I think that's the weakest link in the chain that we're trying to develop. So there's other things that we can do, like changing the grip width or the hand orientation, like neutral grip versus palms facing away from you, etc. Or even like assigning certain tempos along to that to keep pressure on the lat the entire time. But the machine is really the thing that's allowing for that to happen. And again, one of the reasons that happens is because if people are just doing kipping pull-ups or just doing band assisted pull-ups, they can easily get away from using the lats and kind of compensate around a weak lat. Whereas there's really no other way to do the lat pull down other than how it's exactly meant to operate for the machine. So it's keeping the pressure, so to speak, on the weak link in the chain, which again, in this case, is the lat. And obviously lats are something that is super important for CrossFitters to develop, you know, any athlete really, but CrossFitters in particular, because like pull-ups, muscle ups, you got rope climbs, legless rope climbs, peg boards, and even like it plays a very important role in like spine stabilization for like Olympic lifts, deadlifting, right? It's a major spine stabilizer, and it helps keep the back extended, or at least in that neutral position when you're actually moving through hinging reps as well. And what I see at a lot of people is if they start to lose their back, like rounding, entering into spinal flexion, that the lats usually aren't strong enough. It certainly could be bracing or just mechanics, but oftentimes having stronger lats plays a very important role in being able to keep the spine neutral while hinging. So the most common way that I would write lat pull downs would just be in like a strength and hypertrophy type rep ranges. So like anywhere from 5 to 10, often like 6 to 8 type range, where they're all heavy, but you can again keep the technique that we're actually looking for in the movement. And honestly, that kind of applies to everyone from a soccer mom who's trying to get her first pull-up so she can do her CrossFit class RX, all the way up to people who are professional CrossFit athletes trying to like top off their strength surplus for the sport needs. My second favorite machine is a hack squat or a leg press, and a new toy just showed up at the gym this week. I'm super excited. So I used to work out at commercial gyms a lot, and that's actually where I started doing my CrossFit training, believe it or not. And like you kind of get frowned at doing CrossFit at commercial gyms, but I would always add in either leg sled or a hack squat into a secondary squat day. So I would have like my primary squat day where I'm like doing heavy back squats or front squats or even both. And then I'm gonna have a secondary day that's either like more back off, kind of like a little bit lighter percentages, and then like hypertrophy work to support that. And then often as part of that, I would either use leg sled or hack squat. And again, the great thing about this, it allows you to train the legs in a way where there's just like less shear on the back, right? The back doesn't take as much brunt of, if you're doing volume front squats, for example, the midline can definitely be a limiting factor. Whereas if you're doing hack squats, even though it might be a very similar stimulus on the legs, the midline, doesn't get taxed to the same degree, so it allows you to kind of push the volume elsewhere in your program. But then B, it allows you and demands that you stay in the correct position. So you can't have your butt shoot out the back when you're in a hack squat because you're in that fixed position. So it demands that the tension stays on the quads and the hips relative to torso, like they stays in alignment the entire time. There's nowhere else that you can do the movement. Like you can't compensate around poor mechanics. So it just keeps the pressure, and in this case, like the quad, if it's like the hack squat, right? It keeps the pressure on that thing the entire time and allows you, again, to train the weak link in the system, which is why I love hack squats so much. So again, it allows you to train the legs really heavily without having to have as much of the midline stabilization, the bracing, the position that's actually required to do a high volume of back or front squats. So I will regularly use either hack squats or leg sled or both, a combination of the two, when I'm doing like strength development, like more like off-season type training, like building up weaknesses for athletes, when it's a little bit less sport specific in their training. Now this machine here is the RIT Keep 10A, which, full disclosure, they are partnering with me for this video and they did send the product to me. However, really all my thoughts and opinions about the product are my own, and I'm allowed to say whatever I want. But they did send me the machine. And honestly, it worked out quite nicely because I was scouting out leg sled hack squat hybrids because that's actually exactly what I wanted. One where it was convenient to actually switch between the two. And one of the things that I love about this is that it can fully convert from hack squat to leg sled and back probably within, you can switch between the two in like 15 seconds probably. It's very quick and it's designed well for both. I've been on several of these hybrids where you get into it and the position feels comfortable for the one. Usually it's like, okay, leg sled feels okay, but then the hack squat, like the position is just a little bit off where it's often like kind of pushing your hips forward and it feels like it's putting a lot of pressure on the anterior knee, more than it would just normally be for a hack squat because they're already a very knee quad driven movement, which is the point, but I feel like this one's set up well where it allows you to maximize the qualities that you would kind of want to go after for both of the movements, and it's convenient to switch between the two. And now why I like, and I would probably recommend people to get like a hack squat leg sled hybrid, is because they're two very different movements. The hack squat is much more, as I said, like you're working around the knee a lot more. The hips aren't, I mean, they're certainly involved still, no different than like a front squat, right? Hips are very much so involved in a front squat, but it's a little bit more of a knee driven movement. What I mean by that is like you're gonna get more forward knee travel and you're gonna get more quad involvement. Whereas something like a leg sled, on the other hand, especially if you put your feet high on the plate, which I really like to do, it's gonna be very hip driven with the movements. You're gonna get a lot more glute in particular. Yes, you're still gonna use the quads, but it's not gonna be to the same degree as something like a hack squat. So it kind of biases two different systems, and depending on what type of athlete and what you're preparing for, you would use them in different places. And certainly you could mix and match the two like I tend to do for a lot of my athletes. Again, shout out to Ripkeep for collaborating with me on this video. Honestly, I'm super happy with the machine. It is well built. When we opened the gym, everything we opened with was Rogue equipment, and this feels like it's on par in terms of quality. Like the design, the build is robust. I'm happy with it. So thank you to those guys for sending it over to me. Lastly, there's a link below if you want to pick one up. It is an affiliate link. All right, my number one favorite machine, I actually don't have yet. But it's a hamstring curl. That's number one. Yeah, I don't have one yet, but I will definitely be picking one up at some point. And one of the things, again, when I coach a lot of CrossFitters, I'm a CrossFitter, competitive CrossFitter. So one of the things that CrossFit tends to lack is a lot of knee flexion based things. Even if we're getting hamstring, it's usually around moving around the hip. So you're getting hip extension using the hamstring, not knee flexion using the hamstring. So the hamstring crosses both the hip and the knee. It's acting on two different joints. Okay, there's a couple of different muscles that do that kind of thing. Biceps would be another one, right? Where it's acting on both the shoulder and the elbow. Now the hamstring, we get a lot of that upper hamstring that's acting on the hip. We get very little, almost zero hamstring that's acting on the knee. Maybe something like running would be an example of this, where you're getting some active knee flexion from the hamstring, but that's in a very different environment than something that would be like a strength, maybe a little bit slower end of the spectrum and strength based. That's much more like speed, power end of the spectrum. And also a lot of the things that are strength based in using the hamstring, you're still not getting a really high time under tension. So even if you're doing touch and go deadlifts, which would probably be like the most hamstring demanding, in my opinion, movement in CrossFit off the top of my head, that I would say you're still not getting that much time under tension on the hamstring itself, especially in that eccentric. So you're often trying to speed up that eccentric as fast as possible so that you spend the least amount of energy on it and you can just move through reps quicker. So you're actually thinking about actively speeding up the eccentric rather than actively controlling it, which is just generally recommended for a lot of strength training. That's a good kind of principle to think about. So one of the things that I try to do is get some time under tension on the hamstrings, and in particular things that are knee flexion based. A hamstring curl was obviously a perfect example of this. If you have a hamstring curl machine, this is going to allow you to get a lot of time under tension and build up the hamstrings in a way where they're kind of more equal and in balance with the quads, because a lot of we see out of a lot of CrossFitters is that they're very quad dominant. Now for my athletes who have maybe a commercial gym, CrossFit gym hybrid, like I have some clients who are out in New York City and their gym has both a lot of machines as well as an entire CrossFit area. And for them, a lot of them I'm putting in hamstring curls on a weekly basis just as a way to maintain knee health and to maintain hamstring strength. For people like myself who don't have one of these machines just yet, what I tend to go to is a lot of glute ham raises, because a lot of CrossFit gyms obviously have GHDs, glute ham developers. So being able to do a slow eccentric glute ham raise is a great option. That's gonna be obviously centric around the knee for flexion. And so that's more of like the time under tension mechanical stress component of it, where I'll tend to go for more like metabolic stress and like higher rep ranges and a little bit more like going after some like tendon qualities and things like that is with the banded hamstring curl. So setting up a bench and a band, just going through high reps, let's call it anywhere from like 30 to 50 reps in a set. So way higher rep range generally for those, just because the band lends itself well to that. And then you can also pair this with something like end range isometrics, which is basically sort of like an FRC, functional range conditioning type technique, where you might be doing an isometric like hold in that knee flexion based and range, holding it, contracting and relaxing and doing that again. So more of like a PNF style, but more geared towards strength than range of motion necessarily. So developing that end range strength again is gonna only have benefits to knee health. So those are my top 3 machines. I would say at the end of the day, there is no shortcut to strength. The foundation to any good program is going to be sound strength training principles applied over the course of many years. Certain machines, particular tools, or specific protocols can definitely move the needle, but 100% there is no magic bullet. So one of the ideas, the concepts behind why certain machines can be so helpful is that it creates this high stability environment so that you can actually produce maximal force, or that you can translate as much force into a very specific pattern that you want without it breaking down. If you want to hear about how you can use machines, in particular for training CrossFit athletes, I have a great podcast with Casper Vinther where we talk extensively about bodybuilding and machine work and how it can be applied in a beneficial way to the CrossFit athlete.